Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at A Feast for Odin. This is a 1 to 4 player worker placement, tile placement economic game where you take the role of a community of Vikings, raiding and exploring new territories, hunting, gathering goods, refining materials, and buying and building ships, trying to become the most successful community of Vikings. How do you become the most successful community of Vikings? By having the most victory points at the end of 6 or 7 rounds. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's take a look at the components, setup, and how a round and turn work in A Feast for Odin. Starting with the game boards, you have the main action board, you have your player boards, you have the oval supply tile board, you have your exploration boards, which are your square boards that have different locations. And you have your ship supply board. You have 2 action extensions that can go under your action board if you're playing a 4-player game. You have the round tile that keeps track of where you are in your current round. You have 3 types of building tiles. You have a mountain strip. You have 3 types of ships: whaling ships, which are your small ships, Nars, which are your medium ships, and then you have the long ships, which are your large ships. Then you have your special tiles, which goes on the oval supply tile board. Then you have the money, and then 2 trays of goods. And then finally you have your round penalty markers. On the back side of the penalty markers, they do have resources. In case you run out of a resource, you can use the back of these markers. Next, we'll look at the wooden components. We have wood, stone, and ore. Then you have your Vikings in 4 different colors. You have a starting player moose. You have a round track cube. And then you have 2 dice. And then finally we have cards. You have the light brown, which are your starting occupation cards. You have your dark brown, which are your normal occupation cards. And then you have your reddish brown, which are your weapon cards. There are 3 different type of occupation stacks that you get in your game. The beginning level is suggested to start with just the A cards. If you've played the game before, you can shuffle the B and C occupations together for your occupation stack. Now let's look at the setup for A Feast for Odin. We're going to be setting this up for a 2-player game, which takes 10 steps. Step number 1 is to place your action board and the goods in the center of the table within reach of all the players. And if you're playing a 4-player game, you'll put your action extensions at the bottom. Step number 2 is to set up your ship and special tile boards. Step number 3 is to draw and fill out your mountain strips. In a 1, 2, 3-player game, you're going to shuffle and draw 2 of the mountain strips. If it's a 4-player game, you'll draw 3, placing them face up and putting the goods on top. The rest of the mountain strips will be face down. Step number 4 is to lay out your 4 exploration boards with the letter side face up. Step number 5 is to stack your building tiles. Step number 6 is to place your resource pools around the table within reach of all of your players, and to set your round tile with the marker at number 1. Step number 7 is to get and set up your personal player board, or Viking community, by grabbing all of the Vikings of one color. If this is the long game, you're going to place 7 Vikings over the 7 numbers. And if it's a short game, you are going to be placing 6 Vikings over the 6 numbers. So since we're playing the long game, we'll place 7 over those numbers. You placed your 7 Vikings in the feast area. So during the feast piece, you need to cover up all of the squares that do not have Vikings. Step number 8 is to get your starting supplies, which means you have your 1 starting occupation card, so 1 of the light brown cards. You will get 3 weapons, specifically a bow, snare, and a spear, and then 1 mead. Step number 9, you're going to shuffle and stack all of your weapons, and your dark brown occupation cards, making sure that if it's your first time playing, you start with the A cards, and then if you've played this game a few times, you can mix in the B and C occupation cards. Then finally, step number 10, you are going to choose a starting player. Now let's take a look at how a round and turn plays out in A Feast for Odin. A game consists of 6 to 7 rounds. Each round consists of 12 phases. Phase number 1 is a new Viking phase. This is where you take one of your Vikings from the feast or the banquet up at the top of your player board and slide him down to your community tree, making him available for this round. So in a long game, you will start round 1 with 6 Vikings being able to place on actions. And if it's a short game, you'll start with 7. Phase number 2 is the harvest phase. Under the round number in orange, you are going to produce this level of goods. So in a long game in the first round, you will produce peas, beans, and flax. These are the orange tiles with the 1 indicated in the bottom left corner. Phase number 3 is to turn exploration boards and place silver. In blue, under the round number, you will turn that letter indicated. So in the first 2 rounds of a long game, you will not turn any of the exploration boards. In any of the rounds that you turn exploration boards, you will place 2 silver on any unclaimed exploration boards. This is indicated by the symbols below the 4 letters on the player board. Phase 4 is to draw a new weapon. You'll draw a weapon and place it face up in your supply. Phase 5 is the action phase. In turn order, you're going to take 1 action at a time until you have placed all of your Vikings or you have passed. Each space can only be occupied once. If you are placing Vikings in this first column, you are going to only place 1 Viking to activate that action. In the second column, you have to place 2 Vikings. In the third column, you're going to place 3 Vikings, and you are going to gain an occupation to your hand. These occupations are the dark brown occupations. Then in the fourth column, you're going to place 4 Vikings, and you're going to be able to play an occupation from your hand. Now let's take a look at the actions for each row on the action board. The first row is the build houses. You're going to pay 2 wood for a shed, you're going to pay 1 stone for a stone house, and then you would pay 2 stones for a longhouse. And then finally in the last column, you can pay 2 stone and 2 wood to get either of the combinations listed. The second row is the build ships, where you will pay 1 wood for a small whaling ship, 2 wood for a Nar or medium-sized ship, and then the third spot is 2 wood for a long ship, and then the fourth spot would be the same as the build houses, where you pay 2 stone, 2 wood for either of the combination. Only 1 player can go in that combination spot. The next row is the hunting row, where you will place Vikings and use your boat, if it requires one, to roll a dice. So for these first 2 columns, you'll be rolling the orange die, and the last 2 you'll be rolling the blue die. You're going to roll it up to 3 times. You want to have the lowest number. After you finish rolling, you're going to pay resources and weapons indicated on that particular action spot to match that number. The number on the die is reduced if you're using your ship and you have an ore on your ship. If you match that number or go above that number, you will gain the tiles or cards indicated. And if you lose, you'll get wood and the weapon indicated, as well as you can gain some of your Vikings back to your player board. Next, we have the livestock market, where you will pay money to get the particular tiles indicated. Then we have the weekly market, which will gain you food and resources. Then we have the products row, which will get you products, especially if you have cattle or sheep. Then we have the crafting row. This is where you exchange tiles or goods for upgraded tiles and goods. And if you're in the last column, will also gain money. Next, we have the mountain and trade row. This is where you get the leftmost resources from the mountain strips, or upgrade goods from the supply. The arrow is for the level at which you can upgrade, so 1 level up or 2 levels up. And then the number is how many goods you can upgrade. Next we have the sailing rows. These are the rows for blue, pink, and orange. For the blue rows, as long as you have the medium ship or the yar, pay 1 silver and flip any number of green non-equal tiles to their blue side. And then in the third column, you can buy up to 2 special tiles, paying their cost. Except for the crown, you cannot buy the crown. The pink are the raiding, pillaging, and plundering. For this, you'll roll the die up to 3 times. So for the first raiding, you'll roll the orange die, and then for the pillaging, you'll roll the blue die. And you'll roll it up to 3 times, trying to get the highest number you can. After you've rolled the die, you will also add sword and stone to that roll if you would like, to then purchase a sword icon tile with that number or less. If your roll is less than or equal to 5 with stones and the sword, it is considered a fail and you would just gain a stone and a sword. And then if you did it on the pillaging, you would gain a stone and a sword and one of your Vikings back. Now with this particular row, you're going to be using your long ships, and then any ore on the long ship would count toward that roll, except for the raiding, which the ore would not count. And the last one, plundering, you need 2 long ships, and then you'll gain a silver hoard. The orange is the exploration, where you can add one of the exploration boards to your boards, as long as you have one of those ships that you can explore with. Then the last rows are the immigration and occupation. For the yellow immigration, you will pay the money equal to the round number and flip one of your ships over and put it at the banquet hall. So you can flip either the medium or the long ship over and cover up squares on your banquet hall. Then lastly, we have the occupation actions, where you can gain and play occupations. Once everyone has played all of their Vikings or passed, you move on to phase 6. Determine start player. Whoever placed Vikings last during the action phase will become the new start player and would gain the start player moose. That brings us to phase 7, the income phase. This is where you gain money equal to the lowest number in the income diagonal of all of your boards. So the income diagonal on all of your boards will have income numbers shown, and then the lowest one on each board is how much you would get paid during this phase. So if you covered up all of your income on your regular player board, then you would get 18 silver. Next we have phase number 8, animal breeding. If you have 2 sheep or cattle, you would take the regular sheep and flip it over to the pregnant side. And if you had a pregnant sheep or cattle during this phase, you would flip it back over and gain another sheep or cattle. That brings us to phase number 9, which is the feast phase. The banquet hall squares must be full all the way up to your Vikings. 1 tile of each color can be placed horizontally. Colors cannot go next to one another. So 2 reds cannot go next to each other, or 2 orange. But your silver can go next to each other, and your red can go next to an orange. This also is depicted to the bottom left of the banquet hall squares. If you have a square that is open, you would take a penalty token for each of those squares that are open in your banquet hall during this phase. That brings us to phase number 10, which is the bonus phase. You will gain items from your board that are printed on the board and completely surrounded. So with this coal icon, if you completely surrounded it with tiles, then you would gain a coal during this phase. Phase number 11 is the update and add new mountain strip phase, where you will remove the leftmost resource from your mountain strips. And if it's down to nothing or 1 money spot left, you will discard that strip. And then you'll turn over a new strip face up and place all the resources on that mountain strip. And then we have phase number 12, where you remove Vikings placed on the action board back to the player board. After this is finished, you will go back to phase number 1 and start the second round. That brings us to the anytime actions. These are actions you can take anytime throughout the round. You can place goods on your home board, exploration board, or your house tile, making sure that you're aware of the placing guidelines that are in the corner of these tiles. For your home board and exploration boards, you can place your blue, green tiles, silver, and ore. For the house tiles, you can place orange and red. The next anytime action is to buy a ship. You can buy a ship by just paying the cost that is on the ship board. You can change over silver denominations. You can arm your ships with ore. And if you have an occupation that has a blue background, then that is considered an anytime action. So these rounds will continue on until you finish round number 7, or if you're playing the short game, round number 6, and then you go into the final scoring. Once you finish the final round, you go into the final scoring. The final scoring takes 14 steps that are located on the score sheet. This is where you're going to be tallying up your community's value, and the community that has the most value at the end of the final scoring is considered the most successful Viking community and wins a feast for Odin.